Shalom Aleichem. My name is Shimon Sporn. It is a privilege for me to share with you today some thoughts and history of our great ancestor, Harav HaGaon Meir Eisenstadt Zecher Tzadik Kadosh Uvracha, known as the Panim Eros. In the 18th century, 40 years before the famous Chassam Sofer published his own Shuvis, Rabbi Meir Eisenstadt was one of only two great rabbis in the Austro-Hungarian Empire to publish his halachic responsa, his own Shuvis. He was born in 1670 in Poland. He was the son of Rav Yitzchak Ashkenazi. His maternal grandmother was the sister of Harav HaGaon Rav Shapsi ben Meir HaKohen, the author of the Sifsei Kohen, known as the Shach, from Halashav, Moravia. Rav Meir Eisenstadt was named after his great-great-grandfather, Harav Meir HaKohen Ashkenazi, the Rav of Amistov, who was the son of Rav Moshe HaKohen Ashkenazi, the Dayan in Frankfurt, Germany. Rav Meir Eisenstadt learned primarily by the great Gaon Rav Moshe, the chief rabbi of Sakhachev. Years later, in his Sefer Kesones Or, he would quote his teacher many times in his Chuvas. Rav Meir married Finkel, the daughter of Rav Moshe Sakhachever, the well-known community leader, activist, and Stadlan of Posen in Poland. Rav Meir was fortunate enough to sit and learn in the vast library of Sfarim of his father-in-law for over 10 years without any interruptions. By the time that 10 years were up, his fame and reputation in the area as a great Talmudic scholar was well known. While still in his 20s, he was appointed Dayan in the city of Shedlovitz. While still in his 20s, Rav Meir was appointed by his Rebbe, Rav Moshe of Sakhachev, to be a Dayan on his Beis Din. In fact, he was so well regarded that his mother's uncle, Rav Yonah Nachum HaKohen, the brother of the Shach, described him in his Sefer as a profound, intelligent, sharp, never stops learning, well-armed and fully equipped to wage war on behalf of Torah, as the right-hand man of our great chief rabbi here in Sakhachev. Soon enough, throughout the area, his reputation spread, and he was invited to become the chief rabbi of Shedlovitz in the Radomsk province in Poland. In Shedlovitz, the community needs for his leadership was so overwhelming, with so many challenges and problems. After a short period of time in Shedlovitz, he was invited by the chief rabbi of Austro-Hungary, Reb Shimshon Wertheimer, to be the Rosh Yeshiva of the city of Worms in Germany. In fact, the Rav of Worms, the Chavas Yair, Rav Yair Bacharach, looked fondly on him and regarded him as the most accomplished scholar next to himself. In 1689, during the 9 Years' War, the French army invaded and captured the city of Worms and destroyed it. Hundreds of Jews, including Rav Meir and his family, were forced to leave. So he headed in the direction of Proznitz in Moravia. After he had traveled about 200 kilometers, he reached the city of Hatzfeld in Germany, and there the people didn't let him go. He stayed a brief period of time to make halachic decisions for the unfortunate, for the people displaced by the war. Eventually, he continued on his way, traveled another 700 kilometers, and finally reached the city of Proznitz. In Proznitz, he raised the standard of the Jewish community. One of his major decisions was resolving the issue of being able to write a bill of divorce, a get, because the Rumza River near the city of Proznitz was not considered significant enough to be mentioned on a get. And location-wise, the nearest river should be mentioned. And he found a halachic way of being able to issue gets in the city of Proznitz where none had been issued before. Rav Meir was Rav in Proznitz for over 10 years. While there, he established a yeshiva, and students came to him near and far. One of his most famous students was a local orphan by the name of Yonason Abishitz. This little Yonason grew up in Rav Meir's house. Rav Meir and his wife raised him as if he was their own son. Another major decision was the name of the city itself. To write the name of Proznitz on a ksuva for people getting married or on a get, there was confusion because the German-speaking citizens called it Proznitz. The Bohemian and Hungarian-speaking citizens called it Prostyav. And he, after examining the issue, he decided that the city would be phonetically spelled Prostitz. And his decision was adopted by all Rabbanim throughout the area in other cities as well. After 10 years in Proznitz, he returned to Shedlowitz in Poland. While there, he reopened his yeshiva, and fortunately for us, he wrote down all the lectures that he delivered on Yoredeya, specifically many details of the halachot of Yayin Nesech. In 1704 and in 1707, Count Rákóczi initiated his revolution against the Habsburg Empire. The Jewish community of Eisenstadt was devastated. The shul was destroyed, the Talmud Torah was destroyed, and other community structures were devastated as well. Reb Shimshon Wertheimer, still the far-reaching chief rabbi in the empire, sent the funds to rebuild the shul and the mikveh, and in 1717, he invited Reb Meir to become the Mora d'Asra, the chief rabbi of Eisenstadt. Reb Meir was 44 years old at the time. Eisenstadt was one of the oldest and most prominent Jewish communities in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, dating back to the 1300s. When Reb Meir arrived, there were very few Jews left in Eisenstadt. Eisenstadt was one of the Shiva Kehilas, the 7 communities in Burgenland, including Lachenbach and Deutschkraus, Kobersdorf, Frauenkirchen, Kitzi, and Mattersdorf. Once there, he adopted the last name Eisenstadt and started to work hard to rebuild the Jewish community and raise its standards. After a period of time, Eisenstadt, through Reb Meir's efforts, became known as the Little Jerusalem, the Kleine Yerushalayim. Reb Meir instituted many new practices and minhagim to maintain the standards for the community at large. For instance, the Jewish mayor of the community, the Rosh HaKol, was not allowed to appoint any relatives to be the gabbai or any public function. On Friday afternoon, before Shabbos, the gates of the Judengasse, the streets where the Jews lived, were locked to protect and preserve the sanctity of the Shabbos. There was a Keren Tzitzit, a large silver bowl that hung at the entrance of the shul. And anyone in the community that needed strings for their tzitzis, their talis katan or talis gadol, were able to obtain the strings from the Keren. Rav Meir also announced that any child that would find a worm in a cherry should immediately let him know, and from then on, the shamish would announce that the cherries were now had worm infestation and needed to be thoroughly checked. This was, again, something that Rav Meir instituted to maintain and preserve and improve the standards of kashrus in all facets of Jewish life in Eisenstadt. He as well opened up a yeshiva and attracted students from all over Austria-Hungary to come and learn Torah and keep the tradition of his teachings. One of the takanas that he instituted was he forbade the playing of cards on any day of the year except for Hanukkah, Purim, or in a home where the mother had gave birth to a child. Another practice that he instituted was he allowed the selling of the Aliyat LeTorah to the highest bidder. The Esterházy noble family, who ruled over major regions of the country, granted autonomy for communal structure and tax purposes to the Jewish community. In fact, Eisenstadt and other cities had a jail cell, so that if, God forbid, a Jew or even a Gentile would commit a crime of theft against another, the Jewish community can impose a jail sentence. Reb Meir decided how long a jail sentence someone may be given by the Beis Din, Jew or Gentile alike. Overall, he did what he could to encourage Jews to settle their differences in the Beis Din and avoid going to the civil courts. Rav Meir, after examining the issue, was firmly against the practice, which was common at the time, of using borurim in Zabla for Jews who had financial disagreements. He felt better for the dayanim and rabbinic judges to be paid by the community so that there would be no doubt as to their impartiality on any case. Unfortunately, in 1723, a disgruntled citizen made false accusation against Rav Meir with the government, and he was forced to leave. He was away from Eisenstadt for close to 3 years. In his absence, the community selected another rabbi by the name of Leib to take his place. There is a story told in our family as related by the famous descendant of Rav Meir, Reb Isser Zalman Meltzer, the Rosh Yeshiva of Slutsk and Eitz Chaim in Jerusalem, that to calm down his wife, who was extremely saddened by this whole affair, Rav Meir wrote her a letter, and in the letter he said, "It's okay. Obviously this was by Hashgacha Pratis. This is by divine providence. After all, King David wrote in the 41st parak of Tehillim, Higdil alai a cave, which means that he raised his heel against me." And the last letter of those 3 words, Lamed Yud and Beis, spell out the name Leib. So he saw that it was meant to be. Rav Meir Eisenstadt was held in high regard by the other great rabbis of his generation. These included the Shagas Aryeh, the Noda B'Yehuda, the Moralmi Prague, Rab Avram Broda of Frankfurt, Rab Gershon Politz of Nikolsburg, Rab David Oppenheim of Prague, Rab Yaakov Poprish of Koblenz, and Rab Moshe Charif of Presburg. In fact, Rab Avram Broda wrote a rather unusual letter of Haskama. And here are his words. Although I don't usually write letters of Haskama for Sfarim in our generation, because most of them are a waste of paper and ink, and embarrass the Torah because of our many sins. But here we have a great tree whose words are an exception to the rule. The Sephardic chief rabbi of Belgrade, Reb Levi ben Yitzchak Yerushalmi, wrote to him with the following situation. Half of his community was Sephardic, who followed the halachot and standards of the Beis Yosef and the Rambam, and the other half of the community was Ashkenazic, and they followed the standards of the Ramah. When someone in the community would make a celebration for a bris or a wedding or a bar mitzvah, some people felt they could not eat, others felt they could. To what general standard should he maintain these community celebrations? Reb Meir Eisenstadt, recognized by all major rabbanim of his time, was considered to be the highest halachic authority of his generation. And he was the ultimate decision maker on the most pressing halachic issues of the day. In his era, there were multiple wars, large and small, between the various kings and queens and dukes and barons of every province in Europe. And every time, as we know throughout history, that there is a war, the Jews, cities in Shtetlach, large and small, would suffer, would be driven out, would be displaced. And these would cause great halakha questions and serious ones involving Yerusha, involving aguna, involving money, involving earning a living, areas of Yeridea, Choshen Mishpat, scarcity of funds, what to buy, a candle for Hanukkah. One issue that he had to answer was from the community of Budapest. The Germans called Budapest Ofen. The Hungarian Slovakian Jews called it Buda or Pest. And still others called it Budhar. For a ksuba or a get for divorce, how should it be written? In his introduction to his Sefer Panim, Reb Meir discusses the following question. Is it necessary for the author to write his name in or leave it anonymous? The Gemara in Masechta Yevamos says, when the words of someone's teaching is repeated in his name after he passes away, then his lips move in the grave. So perhaps better to write his name to be able to fulfill these words of the Gemara. Of course, his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren throughout the generations till today certainly publish his Sfarim, and as attributed, of course, to his name. Rav Meir in his lifetime and afterwards published various Sfarim on Shas, Halacha, and the Torah. They included Or HaGanuz, Panim, and Kisones Or. In the Sefer Doros Hachronim, there is the following story. About 9 years before he died, Rav Meir was traveling, and when it reached later in part of the afternoon, he asked the driver to stop the wagon, and he went out to daven mincha. However, he first looked for a body of water to wash his hands. He walked and walked. He walked approximately 2 miles till eventually he found a little lake. However, on the shore of the lake, he stepped into quicksand, and before he knew it, he was completely buried. When he hadn't returned after several hours, the driver went to look for him. A few days later, he was found, barely breathing but still alive. Hashem was watching over him. He was able to squeeze out the moisture and drops of water and suck on it until he was found. When they pulled him out, he was completely covered in mud from head to toe. Hashem blessed him with 10 children, many of whom became well-known Rabbanim and Roshei Yeshiva in the cities of Mir and in Brisk, Lachenbach, Biala, Shidlowitz, Kletsk, and even Navardik and Shershov. Rav Meir Eisenstadt passed away at the age of 74 on the 24th of Sivan in the year 5504, June 6, 1744. But in the last 200 years, his descendants, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, till today continued his path of lighting up the world and leading the Jewish communities in Torah and preserving of mitzvos. In the last 200 years, his descendants, including the leading Torah scholars and rabbis of their time. They included Rabbi Eliezer Kalir of Kellen, Rabbi Chil Michal Epstein, the Aruch HaShulchan of Navardik, Reb Chaim of Sanz, Rabbi Yecheskel of Shiniv, the Netziv of Volozhin, Reb Shlomo Zalman Uman, the Uriah Shlomo of Makiv, Reb Moshe Grunwald, the Arugas Habosem, the Keren LeDavid, the Vayagid Yaakov and the Vayechi Yaakov of Papa, the Hasidic Rebbes of Radishutz, Pinchov, Stropkov, Pevazhorsk, and Reb Elimelech of Lezhinsk. In more recently, Reb Zalman Meltzer, as we mentioned before, his son-in-law Reb Aaron Kotler, and Reb Shmuel Halevi Vosner, the Shevet Levi, Reb Moshe Stern of Debrecen, and Reb Avram Tzvi Unger of Kapuvar. His legacy of scholarship, Torah, and rabbinic leadership continues till today. We hope and pray that his merit will continue to protect and guard the Jewish people until the coming of Mashiach.